Yeah.
Good evening, class. My name is Brendan Blackwelder. I'm here today with my teammates to give you information on social media usage that may lead you to the conclusion to stop using it. Our team can reliably educate you as we are all experienced social media users and have further researched the topic for you. Next slide. How big is social media? Well, as of today, it's estimated that there are over 3 billion social media users, which is almost half the world's population. As you can see, our topic is very relevant to most of the world. Most of the users think positively about their experience on social media. They happily fill out surveys, click ads, and shop for their favorite items, post pictures of their families, boast about their vacations. They raise money for causes they value. They make political and or religious statements and even seek out support groups. As you will learn from our speech, these users need to really realize that there are negatives behind the free social media sites. We will discuss mental health implications, addictions to social media, privacy concerns, data mining, and surveillance capitalism. Now I will turn you over to Ashlyn for more information.
As briefly mentioned before, social media has had a direct influence on the quality of a person's mental health. With almost everything in life, there are advantages and disadvantages involved. That is what we are experiencing as a society involving our mental health and social media. Originally, when social media like Facebook and Twitter were first created, the intentions were pure. The goal was to provide others inventive ways to virtually communicate. However, like most things, the goals evolved in ways that no longer had the best interest for the user in mind. Next slide. Naturally, as humans, we tend to care how others view us in some degree. But now, through social media, this is the only time in history where we are placed on platforms to be judged by thousands of other people. We are now seeking social approval from friends, peers, or complete strangers consistently throughout each and every day. Co-creator of the like button at Facebook, Justin Rosenstein, said the goal he and his team wanted was to spread positivity and love in the world. He explains that teens getting anxious and depressed from not having enough likes was not at all what his team had expected. Now that society has determined the number of likes as a social status, it is almost impossible to correct. What is occurring is an unreal and generally exhausting chase for popularity, and it's evolved into a vicious cycle of how to become more popular, more attractive, and more perfect. Next slide. Insecurities from filters developed on Snapchat or airbrushed models and advertisements on Instagram have altered the reality specifically for teenagers and adolescents. And this has shown a direct influence on their mental health. And it makes sense. They're being fed a false sense of reality, and in response, they're constantly challenged to find some sense of identity and self-worth. Next slide. The leading effects of social media on mental health are depression and suicide and anxiety. There has been a dramatic increase in depression and anxiety for American teenagers beginning roughly between 2011 and 2013. Next slide. As briefly mentioned, the amount of likes a person receives has now determined the person's self-worth. Along with consistently being surrounded by edited and unrealistic standards, social media can make viewers feel like they are not enough and trigger anxious or depressive thoughts, and depending on the intensity, sometimes suicide. Next slide. The rate of teenage girls out of 100,000 in the US have been admitted into the hospital for non-fatal self-harm was relatively stable until 2010 hit. Since then, it has dramatically increased each year still. Statistically, it has increased 62% for older teenage girls ages 15 to 19 and 189% for younger preteen girls ages 10 to 14. Unfortunately, there is a similar pattern for suicide. The older teen girls are up 70% compared to the prior decade, and younger preteen girls are up 151% for suicide. Former executive from Facebook, Tim Kendall, stressed that these services are killing people and causing people to kill themselves. And what both these rates of self-harm and suicide spikes have in common is the creation and rise of social media. Next slide. Studies show that Gen Zs, the generation born in the mid-1990s to the early 2010s, are the first generation to experience social media exposure starting in middle school. Social psychologist Dr. Jonathan Haidt says, a whole generation is more anxious, more fragile, and more depressed. He continues to explain that Gen Zs are much less comfortable taking risks and that even the rate of receiving a driver's license has dropped. Also, the rates for Gen Zs to go on dates or have any romantic interaction is rapidly dropping, assumingly from troubling thoughts leading up to these social opportunities. Next slide. Which is the start of acknowledging the correlation with social media and specifically social anxiety. Ironically, experiences of social anxiety has increased significantly since the start of social media usage. Because social media is not the way our species as humans are meant to interact. So now individuals, mainly Gen Zs, are uncomfortable in actual social events, like starting conversations, going to the store alone, meeting new people, and just having to interact overall with others face to face instead of virtually behind a screen. Next slide. So, adolescents are having overwhelming thoughts and feelings, but it is because the designers from these companies are influencing them through notifications, recommendations, and other enhancements that have been formulated to influence the user. That way, they view more advertisements and spend more time on these platforms. And the reason why the mental health is failing so quickly is because users can't, or at least feels like they can't, limit themselves online. Living without social media nowadays feels almost impossible because it's specifically designed to be obsessive, which takes us to Maria on the next point, addiction and privacy.
Checking and scrolling through social media has become a popular activity over the last decade. The majority of people's use of social media is non-problematic. However, there is a small percentage of users that become addicted to social media. In fact, psychologists estimate that as many as 5 to 10% of Americans meet the criteria for social media addiction. Social media addiction is a behavioral addiction that is characterized as being overly concerned about social media, driven by an uncontrollable urge to use social media. Addictive social media will look much like any other substance use disorder. Social media platforms such as Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter produce the same neutral circuitry that is caused by gambling and recreational drugs to keep consuming their products. Studies have shown that the constant streams of likes and retweets have affected the brain's reward area with the same kind of chemical reaction as other drugs, such as cocaine. Next. So if you want to know if you are developing an addiction to social media, you can ask yourself this question. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about social media? Do you use social media to forget about your personal problems? Do you feel urged to use social media more and more? And do you become restless or troubled without access to social media? If the answer to all these questions is yes, you may have an addiction to social media and you have to go with a professional. If some of the answer is yes, you are a regular user of social media. However, you should do a digital detox that will help you to take a rest of social media. Next. Have you ever mentioned a product in a spoken conversation and hours later, do you see advertisement of the same product in social media? Well, there are two theories that explain this. The first one is that our phones are listening to us. Google and Facebook reject accusations that they are listening to our conversation to advertise to us. Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp, and Google owns Google Maps and YouTube. These companies, they have other information about us because we usually use these apps in our regular base. So we need to be careful with all this information that we have in the internet because we don't know how these companies can use this information in the future because they take it for their advantage. And the second theory, it says that it is just a clever algorithm. So every social media platform is governed by algorithm. Facebook probably uses the most advanced algorithm in the game because Facebook knows who your family is and who are your closer friends by your interaction. So Facebook will assume that anything that your closer friends are talking about will be interest to you. This is how clever targeted advertising works. Also, your behavior online is used for advertising. So for example, if you go to Google and look up for nice hotels in New York, it's very probable that then when you go to social media, you will see advertisement, a lot of advertisement of nice hotels because the algorithm knows that you were looking for that. So the algorithm work and they show you what do you want to see and also what they want you to see. Next. Now I will pass you to my teammate, Brendan.
Hello. In this segment of the presentation, I'll be informing you on how large social media companies use a technique called data mining for their own collection of user data. You may not know what data mining is, but data mining is a process used by companies that turns large amounts of new raw data into useful information. Social media giants like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and TikTok are always recording activity on the people who use their products. Next slide. This data that these companies take in on a regular basis includes that they track almost everything you do on their sites and anything that you click on, and exactly what images you stop and look at, and for how long you hover over a certain image or ad. But the most valuable information is on your purchase history. These companies are even tracking your mood. They have data if you're an extrovert or an introvert, and they can recognize your sleep patterns. Some of you may find this surprising, but maybe not, since you most likely received a targeted ad based on your history. Ever looked up symptoms whether you're feeling ill? Well, now the social media world is predicting what you have and sending you ads for hospitals and cures. The ads, next slide. The ads and posts that you see are not random, but coordinated. These companies are getting a lot better at understanding what you look like, what you like more and more every day. These companies predict what you would want to purchase based on what you've bought previously. They then use these predictions and proceed to send you ads based on the items that you buy. As you can probably tell by now, this is part of the reason as to why these companies are collecting these vast amounts of valuable data on every user. It all relates to money and profits. It's sales. These companies are learning more about their customers in order to make more effective marketing strategies to increase their sales. The company's main concern is not the user's well-being, but the money that each user represents is your true value to these large corporations. The Social Dilemma summed it up well. They hope we're zombies, clicking through ads, purchasing things. Next slide. While the number one goal of data mining is to gather information on user spending, there are two other goals, and that is user signups and user engagement. Anytime users voluntarily sign up for a service or information on a social media site, they are most likely required to give more information about themselves for future marketing. Many users voluntarily give up their age range, their salary range, the number of people in the household, educational levels, and even sometimes career information. Companies will pay for this information and get a targeted market for sales or research purposes. Next slide. Lastly is user engagement tracking, where social media companies track general points and activities. An example of where this is used today is in politics. Social media can usually easily identify your political affiliations, and therefore, social media companies can play a valuable role in elections by identifying the trends in its users. They can easily predict who you will vote for. Speaking of that, don't forget to vote. And I hope you found this section enjoyable, and I will now pass you on to my teammate, Kat, who will inform you on surveillance capitalism. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking about surveillance capitalism. So what even is that? Surveillance capitalism practices were first consolidated at Google. They used data extraction procedures and packaged users' data to create new markets for this commodity, which was the internet. The phrase was coined by Shoshana Zuboff in 2014, and she explains that surveillance capitalism depends on the global architecture of computer mediation, which produces a distributed and mostly uncontested new expression of power that she christens Big Other, or a third party manipulating. Jeff Siebert, a former senior director of product at Twitter, said that every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded. What he means is quite literally everything. What we've already discussed, the actions that are being monitored are what you look at, what you're looking up, how long you're looking at things, and the engineers on the other side of the screens know what you're feeling, as we've already discussed. They know when you're lonely or depressed. They know who you're looking up and how often you look them up. They know who's looking up your previous friends and their romantic interests and everything. They know what you're doing. They have a whole portfolio on you. They know so much. They know whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. They know what disorders you might have. They know what you've looked up since the start of internet surveillance. Anything and everything that is collectible has been collected. They have every single click you've made cataloged somewhere. So with all of this data being collected, it's sent into servers that have basically no supervision. And these servers can make predictions about what we're going to do next or what's the next thing that we're going to want. The more data that these servers get, the more accurate they can become. These predictions can come in the form of advertisements. As Marie and Brendan were talking before, you look something up and then all of a sudden you're seeing ads for it everywhere. It's no coincidence. All of these companies and advertisers are working together to sell you a product. Now, even though apps like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter collect data from you, they aren't necessarily selling your personal data. They're actually just competing for your attention, which is like, what app are you going to spend the most time on today? Services on the internet are not free. They're paid for by advertisers. So advertisers pay companies like Google and Facebook in exchange for those companies to display their ads. And that's how they make money. So there's a saying that says, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. Justin Rosenstein explains that our attention is the product that's being sold to advertisers. The only outcome that's possible of this is that the consumer changes the way they live or think gradually. That's it. That's all that can come out of it. What actually happens behind the screens is that these companies use the data they collect to build AI models, which represent everybody, like individually, and these models predict our actions. Whichever company has the best model for that advertisement or impression, that company wins the ad space on your device. Tristan Harris, a former Google design ethicist and the co-founder and president of the Center for Humane Technology, describes in the documentary, it's almost as if they had this avatar voodoo-like model of us. These models entail everything we've ever done online. Every video we've watched, every post we've liked, and every photo we've shared. Due to these models collecting all of this data, they can get better and better at predicting what you're going to do or want next. Tristan then goes to explain that these models can predict what kind of videos will keep you watching or what emotions can trigger a response from you. The documentary explains that even though people can be extremely similar, no two people have the same social media feed, specifically due to the targeting for each person. Each ad is targeted to a specific person at a specific time. At these technology companies, there are usually 3 generic goals that they want to achieve, which would be engagement, which is driving up the usage and keeping you interacting with your device; growth, which is to keep you from coming back to your phone and inviting friends and family; and then advertising, which ensures that while entertainment and growth are happening, or engagement and growth are happening, the companies are making as much money as they can through advertisement. These goals are motivated by algorithms, which figure out what to show you to keep you engaged in your device and making the most amount of money out of you at the same time.
Tip: if you don't want to delete social media, well, the best thing that you can do is to delete them. But if you work with them or if you haven't, because just for fun, here are some tips that will be helpful. So turn off the notification. This will help you to don't interrupt the activity that you are doing, and don't look up for the phone at every moment. So the device out the bedroom and a fixed time every night. This will help you to establish a time when you go to bed, and don't be like in the photo that when you go to bed you are using the phone and you are like spending time with the phone that you shouldn't. Also, for parents, no social media until high school. The recommendable age for kids to have social media is 16. However, if your kid has a social media, you have to work out a time budget. For example, you have to put limit times per day so the kids can use the social media just for 2 hours a day or just on the weekend. And in this way, the kids can have a healthy relationship with social media.
So, in conclusion, social media is a ton of fun. We all know that, but it can be super dangerous. There's reason for safety concerns, mental health irritants, and there's possible cause for addiction in serious cases. So, deleting social media might be something that you want to consider, especially if you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. If you truly don't want to part ways, there's always tips that you could follow to ensure your security and stability while online. Stay safe and have fun.
Thank you.